Why are we here? Apart from the fact that this is the first presentation room I've been in with a bar, which has got Amstel on tap and that kind of stuff. Well, we're here really because data is the new oil. So on the chart here, you've got a state of the largest sort of capitalization of companies back in 2006 on the left-hand side and 10 years later on the right-hand side. And you'll see that we've basically moved over from an awful lot of very large oil companies having the largest capitalization through to data companies, and much, much larger than the old oil companies were. So data is becoming much, much more important. As we see the rise and rise of e-commerce, however, we also see the rise and rise of the e-criminal. And cybercrime has now become the world's fastest growing crime. And it's already overtaken the size of the global drug trafficking market. So it's something that we need to be a bit careful of. Now, John and I, both being military officers, or former military officers, take a great interest in matters of national security. So let's have a quick look at the threat landscape. And you'll see here a whole number of egregious activities on the screen, which is through the Navy's periscope here. But I've highlighted the one in the middle, cybercrime, because that really is the largest and most quickly growing of the threats. There's another key reason why you need to pay lots of attention today, and that's the result of this research done by Gartner. So what they've come up with is a figure which I was absolutely astonished at, that 80% of those who hit a major cyber issue are dead in 2 years. Fortunately, you'll be glad to know this is on a corporate basis rather than an individual one. But nonetheless, we do need the corporates to survive to give us the money to enjoy our existence on the planet. So paying attention to what we can do to try and reduce a cyber threat is quite important. A lot of people talk very generally about cybercrime, as if there's only one type of person who goes out there and is always portrayed as this person in a hoodie sitting in a back bedroom, where there are people like that committing cybercrime, but we tend to split it up into 5 key cybercrime actors when we're looking at the policies to take against these people. So the first one there, and no surprise, it's got a weird name to it, advanced persistent threats. That actually means sort of spying by governments, cyber threats from other governments. And a lot of people have got some extremely good capability here. It's not just the Russians and the Chinese, which you hear about in the press, but obviously we're pretty good at it as well. So are our friends in the States. There's quite a few European actors and Israelis, South Africans, the list goes on, and others who are up and coming as well. Cyber espionage, that sounds very James Bond and a bit redolent of if anybody was watching later night TV last night, like I was, watching the Living Daylights. There was a bit of cyber espionage going on in there, as well as the APT stuff as well. Hacktivists, those are the spotty guys in the back bedrooms, basically, if you like. Cyber criminals, these are all very large organised crime groups. Some of them very large, some of them quite small. The definition for UK law enforcement of an organised crime group is 2 or more criminals operating together. So their first sort of survey was done, and they'd identified about 900 of these groups in the UK, changed the methodology slightly a couple of years later, and then came up with about 3,000. So you can see that actually trying to get a handle on how much organised crime is going on is quite tricky. And last but not least, cyber terrorists, and these are much, much more powerful than you might think. So if you go back to that bomb that they had in a nightclub in Bali quite a few years ago, any ideas how much that cost as an operation? It was about 25,000 Australian dollars, about 10,000 sterling. Probably a little bit more given recent exchange rate differences, but you couldn't even get a half-decent car for that. But you could create an awful lot of bang for buck, as it were, if you're looking at it from the terrorist side of life. If you have a look at the income for IS, that's into the billions already. There's an awful lot of capability there, and the cyber terrorists have managed to get in hacked drones, get onto US Central Command's website. You would have thought there would be some protection to stop them doing that. So they're quite a potent force. What I mean by cyber espionage, well, the definition is not really so much have you appeared in the James Bond movie, but it goes through to things like events eavesdropping, employees selling confidential data, all that kind of stuff. Now, if you think about it, employee espionage, cyber espionage in that sense is much more prevalent than you might think, and something to watch out for. So it's starting to get onto the radar screen in a number of other areas as well. So Allianz, which I think is Europe's largest insurance company, based over in Germany. To give you an idea of the size, Allianz's legal department, if it were a separate law firm, would be Germany's largest law firm by quite some considerable margin. So you can see there that cybercrime, IT failure, espionage and data breach is seen as the second most important business risk in their survey done last year. If you have a look at the survey done 5 years ago, it wasn't even in the top 10. So things are growing quite quickly. If you have a look at the one that they did, especially for the UK, it's up at number 1. Have a look at the World Economic Forum. So here's a map showing their global risks of highest concern, and you can see there are certain countries highlighted in purple, and those are the ones for whom cybercrime is their biggest risk as a country. So US, not really a huge surprise there, I guess. Germany, Netherlands, Singapore, Japan, and a few others who are developing quickly on the cyber front as well. That is their biggest risk as a country. World Economic Forum didn't just look at what other governments were saying, but also surveyed leading chief executives around the world and came up with a pretty similar sort of map, although this time including places like India, lots of Scandinavia. Of course, you might think it's got a little bit cooler here in the UK, but it's not anywhere near like it is in Scandinavia. And moving around in the snow and ice is rather difficult. Moving around it electronically is a damn sight easier. So what are the key trends at the moment? So these are the key trends as identified by former head of GCHQ in an interview which was put out on the Wire last week. So the key concerns really are the rise in volume of cyber attack. So in 2016, I think that was 2016 or 2017, there was something like 317 million new pieces of malware created. That's nearly 1 million different kinds of new malware every day. That's a pretty significant threat and a growing one as well. The other key concern is a rise in sophistication. What I mean here by top kit is the kit that we as Her Majesty's government use, which is quite powerful stuff, as you might imagine. But there's an awful lot of other people around the world at governmental level doing similar sort of things. And of course, one of the things you need to do when you've launched an intergovernmental cyber attack is have a good bit of deniability. And one of the ways in which you establish deniability is to leak the kit out. So it could have come from a number of different sources. And of course, what you're doing with leaking the kit out is actually training up the organised crime groups. So that gives us another issue. Commercially, things are looking quite interesting because, of course, I suppose most of us here in this room will be very used to US Western sort of hemisphere approaches to cyber. So we'll all probably have ordered something on Amazon. Most of us will be on Facebook. We've all probably used PayPal and Twitter and so on. But of course, you have a look at the eastern sort of hemisphere, and it's when you're looking at Chinese stuff. And as my very disgruntled daughters discovered when we went to China over the summer last year, the Western stuff doesn't really work very well over there because they've got all this Chinese stuff. So you've got a very significant growth in digital capability over in China as well. So we're really splitting into two big digital hemispheres because there's no real sort of European sector equivalent of this. Where Europe really does come to the fore, and you can see it at the bottom of the slide there in the middle, is GDP Are. And GDP Are doesn't just affect people in Europe. So last year there were more conferences on GDPR in the United States than there were across the whole of Europe, for example. So it is having quite global sort of effects. Now the Americans are starting to wake up in legislative terms on cyber, so there are some new legal initiatives in New York, and more recently you'll have seen it in California. The Chinese and the Singaporeans a little bit on the eastern sort of hemisphere. But GDPR is really, really very, very significant. So a lot of your data protection stuff is going to be hung, cyber protection stuff is going to be hung on GDPR rather than there being any new specific cybersecurity laws. So way back, I mean, John was saying he got into cyber 60 years ago. It was about 25 years ago that I was on as a very junior lawyer then, on a task force by the Centre for the Study of Financial Innovation. And what we were looking at was the question of whether we needed any new laws to combat the rise in digital commerce and any egregious digital behaviour. And we decided that there wasn't any point having any new laws because theft is theft, and cyber was just really an enabler of crime rather than creating any new kinds of crime in themselves. I mean, around the edges there have been a little bit of tinkering on things like the Computer Misuse Act, but there's been no major wave of cyber security legislation, nor are we expecting any. So the powers that be internationally have got together and have put together this global cybersecurity index. And you'll see there that there are 5 pillars to it, only one of which is legal. So there's operational stuff and various other things to consider as well. And that's developing quite fast. You'll see there that even the training stuff comes under the legal pillar rather than anything else, which I was quite surprised at. You possibly remember something else that David Cameron did apart from launch a referendum. And he stated very boldly at a cybersecurity conference in London a few years ago that he wanted to make the UK the leading example of sort of good cybersecurity in Europe. And we've done a fairly good job of it. But on this slide here, which assesses all the different member states most at risk, and there are other elements of their study which they've done to look at who's put most in place and is best protected. We're not actually at number 1, we're usually around about number 5 or so. And even the French are thought to be better at cybersecurity than we are. So don't take it as read when you're doing business cross-border that necessarily we've got the best protection. I've headed up this EU task force on cybersecurity policy for the financial sector, and we've gelled everything down into 3 core themes, and I think these are really important because these do not operate just at member state level but also operate within general commercial companies and financial ones as well. So we've got governance, risk management and capability there. Governance, we're talking at all different levels of governance. You know, how are you putting your structure together to do reporting on cybersecurity incidents? How are you putting the cybersecurity into operation? What is the risk management that you've got to undertake before you actually finalize your systems? And what capability do you need? So we did a quick survey of Europe's leading financial institutions, and they came up with all these sort of different areas of interest. We decided not to make it a report which is going to cover everything under the sun, because otherwise it would be like the 4th money laundering directive, which took sort of 10 years to negotiate. We need some action a bit more rapidly than that. If I drill down from just one of those elements, one of those 9 elements, one thing we concentrated on just to show you the difficulty is the cyber incident reporting requirements. And it's not just under GDPR, but there are cyber incident reporting requirements on financial institutions in 6 different sectors. And some of these will also apply to general commercial companies. So just looking at GDPR is not the only thing to do. And then you get a bit of fragmentation. So here's a bit more of a detailed slide which looks at things like when exactly do you have to make the report on your cyber incident under each of those 6 different levels. And it's different timing for each one. How long have you got to study your incident before you send it in? At the end, a different timing under each one. So there's been a bit of legal policy dislocation, sadly, because not everybody's looking at the same thing in the right time. So you need to look at these practical considerations when you're doing reporting, like, what is an incident? Does it need reporting? If I've got the data encrypted, do I have to report at all? Reducing the risk. I'm still surprised at the lack of people sitting down and looking at, what are your data crown jewels, if you like. Why does everybody seem to need access to those on a system which is also attached to the internet? Very basic sort of things like that. If you look at the organised crime groups, a lot of them are putting their data crown jewels, they're not putting them on any electronic internet accessible platform at all. They're doing it in other ways. Government has been doing a few things. So here's 10 steps to cybersecurity, and the word from Cheltenham is that if you put these in place, you'll get rid of 80% of your cyber risk. So if you haven't done so already, this is a really good thing to go and do. I was asked to quickly look at the impact of Brexit. I don't really want to mention the B word, but from a lawyer's perspective, is there really going to be that much uncertainty? Because at the moment, the way things are staying are that the laws are going to remain the same on the 30th of March as they are on the 29th. So that sounds pretty certain to me. Of course, we may well end up losing some cross-border data exchange capability if we are not a member of the EU or don't have a suitable stand-in agreement to follow that up. And there will still be a psychological impact. What I mean by that, I had a case a few years ago on a money laundering issue where we just needed some KYC evidence from France. It's European law, it's English law, it's French law. The French still turned around and refused to supply it on the basis that they were really pissed off that we'd won the Olympics and they hadn't. So there will be quite a bit of a psychological impact, and it's really difficult enforcing the laws on that as well. So it looks like I'm getting quite close to the end of my time. But just very, very briefly, cybersecurity compliance. You might be compliant with the law, but never underestimate creativity of the criminal, aggression of the attacker, and naivety of staff. Cyber sleep, a lot of the SMEs really haven't woken up to the fact that there's a lot of things happening. And then just a little spot of fun. I'd seen a thing on driverless cars, and everybody's talking about how wonderful these will be. But I'm sitting there thinking, well, all the software guys, all the IT guys always say the human is the weakest link. Well, being a lawyer, I think, well, what they really mean by that is that it's the dumb operator of the software that they've put out there. But actually, what I'm thinking as a lawyer is, who the hell was it who put the software together in the first place? So if you've got your driverless car, would you want a bureaucratically sort of kind of programmed one, like the warden out of Dad's Army? It's not going to be a particularly exciting drive. It's going to comply with every single road traffic requirement. Do you want a slightly more exciting drive? Do you want yours programmed by the STIG? Do you want yours programmed by the cyber terrorist, who of course can just shove an explosive loaded dummy into the driverless car, send it off, doesn't have to be there, no need for a suicide belt, you've got a suicide driverless car, fantastic. Or do you want it programmed by some joker like Bill Oddie, who happened to be at the same school as me, and on his last day of term decided that it'd be really a wacky idea if he would divert all the traffic off the Bristol Road, up Edgbaston Park Road and through the school, and then back onto Bristol Road again. Wouldn't that be a jolly jape? This is the main artery from the south into Birmingham. So who do you want yours programmed by? 3 lines of defence. Basically, don't do this. Everybody at the governmental level is telling you to do this, but we have stopped building castles. The only people who build castles now are Disney. We need something like an integrated air defence system. Put that into an IT context and we'll have much, much better defence. There's some quick cybersecurity predictions, which you can read about on the slides when you get them. And just to emphasise things, governance, risk management capability. If there are only 3 things that you remember from this talk, let them be the guidance, because that's what you will need in order to survive. Thank you very much indeed.